She was just another soccer mom until her daughter's field trip desperately needed a pilot. For 8 years she'd hidden her identity as Ghost, a decorated fighter ace with classified combat kills. When 33rd graders faced disappointment, her secret was about to explode in the most spectacular way. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. The coffee maker in the Oakwood Elementary Teachers Lounge gurgled to life at exactly 6:45 a.m., the same time it had every morning for the past 8 years. Rebecca, Ghost, Mitchell stood beside it, waiting for the first precious drops of caffeine to emerge, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that read "World's Greatest Mom." Around her, the familiar chaos of morning preparation unfolded as teachers prepared for another day of educating third graders. At 39, Rebecca had perfected the art of invisible excellence. She volunteered for every field trip, organized every bake sale, and knew the names of all 127 students in the elementary school. Her sandy brown hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes were sensible and unremarkable. She drove a silver Honda Accord that blended perfectly with every other vehicle in the school pickup line. What nobody at Oakwood Elementary knew was that Rebecca Mitchell had once been Captain Rebecca "Ghost" Sullivan, one of only 12 female fighter pilots in Air Force history to achieve ace status, 5 confirmed air-to-air kills in combat. Her F-22 Raptor had dominated the skies over Syria and Iraq during classified missions that wouldn't appear in any public records for the next 30 years. "Rebecca, thank goodness you're here early," Mrs. Patterson, the school principal, rushed into the teacher's lounge with the kind of frazzled expression that usually preceded educational disasters. "We have an emergency situation with Emma's class field trip today." Emma, Rebecca's 8-year-old daughter, the reason she had retired from active duty and traded her flight suit for suburban anonymity. Emma, who knew her mother had been in the Air Force but believed she'd worked in supply logistics, far from anything resembling actual flying. "What kind of emergency?" Rebecca asked, though her tone remained calm. 8 years of military training followed by 8 years of motherhood had taught her that panic was rarely productive. The Aviation Heritage Museum in Cedar Falls called this morning. Their scheduled pilot demonstrator has food poisoning and can't make it. 33rd graders are expecting to see real aircraft demonstrations and learn about flight operations. Without the pilot demonstration, it's just going to be another boring museum tour. Mrs. Patterson paused, running her hands through her graying hair. "I know this is short notice, but you mentioned you were in the Air Force. Do you think you might know anyone who could help? Maybe someone from your old unit who could drive down and talk to the kids?" The irony was so complete it almost made Rebecca laugh. Here she was, a decorated combat pilot who had logged over 3,000 flight hours in the world's most advanced fighter aircraft, being asked if she knew someone qualified to demonstrate basic aviation principles to elementary school students. What exactly would this person need to do? Rebecca asked carefully. Basic flight principles, aircraft systems, maybe operate their flight simulator if they have the proper qualifications. The museum has a full-scale F-16 simulator that requires someone with actual fighter aircraft experience to operate safely. F-16. Rebecca had flown the Fighting Falcon during her early career, before transitioning to the F-22 program. She knew every switch, every system, every emergency procedure. She could operate that simulator blindfolded while discussing the physics of flight in terms an 8-year-old could understand. But doing so would mean revealing 8 years of carefully constructed deception. It would mean answering questions about why she'd never mentioned her fighter pilot background during countless conversations about career choices and role models for young girls. It would mean explaining to Emma why she'd been hiding the most significant part of her identity. "Let me make some phone calls," Rebecca said. "Maybe I can find someone." As Mrs. Patterson hurried away to handle other morning crises, Rebecca stood alone in the teacher's lounge, staring at her reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at her was a suburban mom, comfortable and unremarkable. But somewhere beneath that carefully constructed exterior was Ghost Sullivan, the pilot who had earned her call sign by appearing in enemy airspace without warning and disappearing before anyone could react. The bus ride to Cedar Falls was exactly as chaotic as expected when 38-year-olds were confined in a moving vehicle for an hour. Rebecca sat near the back, officially serving as a parent chaperone, watching Emma chatter excitedly with her best friend Sarah about the promised aircraft demonstrations. "My mom says real pilots are basically superheroes," Emma announced to anyone within hearing distance. "They fly faster than sound and fight bad guys in the sky." Rebecca felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Emma's image of pilots was formed by movies and television shows, not by understanding the reality of aerial combat. The life and death split-second decisions, the weight of responsibility for multi-million-dollar aircraft, the knowledge that a single mistake could mean death for yourself and potentially innocent people on the ground. I bet they're all men, added Tyler Morrison with the confident ignorance that only third-grade boys could muster. Girls probably aren't strong enough to handle fighter jets. That's not true, Emma replied, her voice rising with indignation. Girls can do anything boys can do. My mom told me so. Rebecca smiled despite her internal conflict. Emma's fierce belief in gender equality was something they discussed many times during bedtime conversations. What Emma didn't know was that her mother had proven that principle in the most demanding environment imaginable, aerial combat against enemies who didn't care about her gender, only about shooting her down. The Aviation Heritage Museum occupied a renovated aircraft hangar on the edge of Cedar Falls Regional Airport. As the school bus pulled into the parking lot, Rebecca could see several vintage aircraft displayed outside: a P-51 Mustang, an F-4 Phantom, and a beautifully restored F-16 Fighting Falcon that made her heart skip a beat. Tom Bradley, the museum curator, met them at the entrance with the kind of forced enthusiasm that came from dealing with disappointed children. Welcome to the Aviation Heritage Museum, everyone. I'm afraid we've had to make some changes to today's program due to our pilot instructor being unavailable. The collective groan from 33rd graders was audible across the parking lot. Emma's face fell as she realized their promised flight demonstration was being cancelled. However, Bradley continued, we'll still have a wonderful tour of our exhibits, and you'll get to see our flight simulator up close, even if we can't demonstrate its operation. As they walked through the museum, Rebecca found herself automatically cataloging details that Bradley got wrong in his presentation. The service dates on AP-51 were incorrect by 2 years. His explanation of jet engine principles was oversimplified to the point of being misleading. His discussion of modern air combat tactics was based on outdated information that hadn't been accurate since the 1990s. But she remained silent, playing her role as an interested parent rather than a subject matter expert who could correct every inaccuracy in the presentation. The simulator room was where the disappointment became most acute. A full-scale F-16 cockpit replica sat behind velvet ropes, its instruments dark and lifeless. The surrounding walls were covered with technical diagrams and photographs from various Air Force bases around the world. This is our crown jewel, Bradley announced to the group. A fully functional F-16 flight simulator with authentic controls and accurate flight physics. Unfortunately, it requires someone with actual fighter pilot experience to operate safely. Emma raised her hand. Why can't you just turn it on? Bradley smiled with the patience of someone who'd answered this question hundreds of times. It's not like a video game, young lady. This equipment replicates the actual experience of flying a multi-million-dollar fighter aircraft. The person operating it needs to understand complex systems, flight procedures, and safety protocols. They need someone who's actually flown fighters in real life. What kind of qualifications would someone need? Asked Mrs. Patterson, still hoping for a miracle solution. Ideally, a current or former Air Force pilot with F-16 experience. At minimum, someone with military flight training and familiarity with fighter aircraft systems. Rebecca felt 30 pairs of eyes turn toward her as Emma suddenly piped up with 8-year-old logic. My mom was in the Air Force. Maybe she knows about airplanes. The attention was exactly what Rebecca had been avoiding for 8 years. Mrs. Patterson looked at her with hopeful desperation. Bradley studied her with the polite skepticism of someone who'd met many people who claimed military aviation experience without actually possessing it. Emma, honey, Rebecca said carefully, I worked in supply logistics. That's different from flying aircraft. But Emma wasn't giving up. With the persistent determination that had gotten her through potty training and learning to ride a bicycle, she looked directly at her mother. But you always know stuff about planes when we see them on TV. And you always correct the movie when they get things wrong about the Air Force. The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Rebecca had spent 8 years carefully monitoring her own behavior, but apparently not carefully enough. A real logistics specialist wouldn't automatically know the difference between an F-16 and an F-18 from a distance, or instinctively correct Hollywood's portrayal of fighter aircraft capabilities. Bradley stepped forward with professional curiosity. Mrs. Mitchell, what was your role in the Air Force? The question hung in the air like flak over enemy territory. Rebecca could feel the weight of 30 children's disappointment if she maintained her cover story. She could also feel the weight of 8 years of deception if she told the truth. Supply chain management, she said finally. Making sure parts got where they needed to go. It wasn't technically a lie. Fighter pilots were responsible for managing the supply chain of ordnance from aircraft to target. But it wasn't the truth either, and the evasion felt heavier than any G-force she'd ever experienced in actual flight. Emma's shoulders slumped with disappointment. Around her, other children began to lose interest, wandering toward other exhibits with the attention spans of people who'd been promised excitement and received mundane reality instead. "Well," Bradley said with resignation, "let's continue with the tour. Maybe we can find other ways to make this educational and engaging." As the group moved toward the next exhibit, Rebecca lingered in the simulator room, staring at the F-16 cockpit that she knew as intimately as her own kitchen. Every switch, every gauge, every warning light was exactly where she remembered. The control stick grip was positioned precisely as she'd left it in her last F-16 flight over a decade ago. Mrs. Patterson appeared beside her. "Rebecca, I know this is a lot to ask, but is there any chance you might know someone from your Air Force days who could help?" These kids were so excited about the flight demonstration. Rebecca looked through the glass partition at Emma, who was pretending to be interested in a display about World War II bombers while clearly still disappointed about the cancelled simulator demonstration. Her daughter's field trip was being ruined by her mother's determination to remain invisible. For 8 years she'd chosen safety over authenticity. She'd built a life based on the principle that Emma would be safer if no one knew about her mother's military background. No questions about deployments, no concerns about PTSD, no assumptions about her parenting choices based on her combat experience. But watching Emma's disappointment, Rebecca began to wonder if protecting her daughter from her past was actually protecting her from her potential future. What message was she sending about women's capabilities? What lessons was Emma learning about hiding your achievements to fit in with others' expectations? "Mr. Bradley," Rebecca said quietly, "hypothetically speaking, what would someone need to demonstrate to prove they were qualified to operate your simulator?" Bradley's eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, they'd need to show familiarity with F-16 systems, demonstrate knowledge of flight procedures, and prove they could operate the equipment safely while explaining complex concepts to children." "And if someone could do that?" "If someone could do that," Bradley said carefully, studying Rebecca's face with new attention, "I'd say we might have just solved our problem." Through the glass partition, Rebecca could see Emma looking in their direction with hopeful curiosity. Other children had gathered around her daughter, drawn by the possibility that something interesting might actually happen on their field trip. Rebecca took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. "Mr. Bradley, I need to tell you something about my actual background." 20 minutes later, the simulator hummed to life for the first time that day. Rebecca sat in the pilot's seat, her hands finding controls with the automatic precision of someone who'd logged thousands of hours in similar cockpits. The transformation was immediate and complete. Gone was the hesitant suburban mom, replaced by a professional aviator with absolute confidence in her abilities. "F-16 Fighting Falcon," she began, her voice taking on the clear, authoritative tone she'd once used to brief combat missions. "Single-engine, multi-role fighter aircraft. Maximum speed, Mach 2. Service ceiling, 50,000 feet. Primary mission, air-to-air combat and precision ground attack." The children pressed against the barrier, watching with amazement as the simulator's displays came to life. Emma's eyes were wide with wonder and confusion. This was definitely not the supply logistics specialist she thought she knew. "The F-16 uses what we call fly-by-wire technology," Rebecca continued, her hands moving smoothly across the controls as the simulator responded to her inputs. "The aircraft is intentionally unstable, which makes it incredibly maneuverable but also means the computer has to make thousands of corrections every second to keep it flying straight." On the main display screen, the virtual F-16 climbed into simulated skies, responding to Rebecca's control inputs with perfect precision. Her movements were so natural, so automatic, that she might have been driving to the grocery store rather than demonstrating one of the world's most sophisticated fighter aircraft. "Mrs. Mitchell," Bradley said, his voice filled with professional admiration, "I have to ask, what was your actual role in the Air Force?" Rebecca paused the simulation and turned to face the group of children and adults who were watching her with rapt attention. Emma was in the front row, her face a mixture of pride, confusion, and dozens of questions waiting to be asked. "I was a fighter pilot," Rebecca said simply. "Captain Rebecca Sullivan, call sign Ghost. I flew F-16s and F-22 Raptors in combat operations for 12 years before retiring to raise my daughter." The silence that followed was profound. Mrs. Patterson's mouth fell open. Bradley looked like he'd just discovered a rare artifact in his own museum. But it was Emma's reaction that mattered most, Her daughter's face lit up with the kind of pride and excitement that made 8 years of secrecy suddenly seem like wasted time. "You were a real fighter pilot?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sweetheart. I was." "Did you really fly faster than sound?" "Many times." "Did you fight bad guys?" Rebecca hesitated. How do you explain aerial combat to an 8-year-old? How do you describe the reality of warfare without destroying a child's innocence? "I flew missions to protect good people from people who wanted to hurt them," she said finally. "That's what pilots do. We use our training and our aircraft to keep others safe." Emma beamed with pride, and Rebecca realized she'd been protecting her daughter from the wrong thing. She'd been hiding her achievements when she should have been teaching Emma that extraordinary accomplishments were possible with dedication and training. "Can you show us more?" Emma asked. For the next hour, Rebecca demonstrated systems and procedures she hadn't discussed with anyone in 8 years. She explained the physics of flight in terms third graders could understand. She showed them how pilots navigate using GPS and ground references. She demonstrated emergency procedures and discussed the importance of training and preparation. Most importantly, she answered Emma's endless questions about what it was like to be a female fighter pilot in a male-dominated profession. "Were you scared?" Emma asked. "Sometimes," Rebecca admitted. "But being scared doesn't mean you can't do something important. It means you have to be extra careful and extra prepared." "Did other pilots think girls couldn't fly fighters?" "Some did. But I proved them wrong by being better prepared and working harder than anyone expected." As the demonstration concluded and the children prepared to board the bus for the return trip, Rebecca found herself surrounded by excited third graders asking questions she'd never expected to answer. Emma stayed close to her side, glowing with pride at having a mother who was a real superhero. Bradley approached as the group prepared to leave. "Mrs. Mitchell, or should I say Captain Sullivan, that was extraordinary. Have you ever considered teaching? We could use someone with your expertise as a guest instructor." Rebecca looked at Emma, who was animatedly describing the simulator demonstration to her classmates. "I might be interested in that." The drive home was filled with Emma's chatter about her mother's secret identity. But her questions gradually became more serious and thoughtful. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were a fighter pilot?" Rebecca considered her answer carefully. "I wanted you to grow up thinking of me as just your mom, not as someone defined by what I did before you were born. But being a fighter pilot is so cool. I would have told everyone." "That's exactly what I was afraid of," Rebecca said with a laugh. "I wanted you to have a normal childhood." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the seriousness that children brought to important revelations. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you miss it? Flying fighters?" The question hit Rebecca like a punch to the chest. She'd spent 8 years not allowing herself to miss flying, convinced that longing for her old life meant she wasn't grateful for her new one. "Yes," she admitted. "I miss it a lot." "Then why did you stop?" "Because being your mom was more important to me than anything else I could do." Emma nodded solemnly. "But you could be both, couldn't you? A mom and a pilot?" Out of the mouths of babes. Rebecca had assumed it was an either-or choice, that she couldn't be both an engaged parent and a military aviator. But Emma's simple question made her reconsider assumptions she'd held for nearly a decade. That evening, as Rebecca tucked Emma into bed, her daughter had one final question. "Mom, what does ghost mean? Why was that your call sign?" Rebecca smiled, remembering the night she'd earned that nickname during a classified mission over Syrian airspace. "It means I could appear where enemies didn't expect me and disappear before they could react. Like a good ghost or a scary ghost?" "A protective ghost," Rebecca said. "Someone who watched over other people and kept them safe." Emma smiled sleepily. "I like that. Can I tell my friends my mom is Ghost?" "You can tell them anything you want, sweetheart." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Rebecca sat in her daughter's room thinking about the day's events. 8 years of hiding had ended in a single afternoon, and the sky hadn't fallen. Emma was proud of her mother's achievements rather than confused or frightened by them. The other parents had been impressed rather than judgmental. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from who she used to be and start integrating that person with who she'd become. The next morning, Rebecca's phone rang at 7 a.m. Tom Bradley from the Aviation Museum was calling with an unexpected offer. "Mrs. Mitchell, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to follow up on your visit yesterday." "Of course. What can I do for you?" "I've been thinking about your demonstration with the children. It was remarkable. You have a gift for explaining complex concepts in accessible ways. I'd like to offer you a position as our Director of Educational Programs." Rebecca nearly dropped her coffee mug. I'm flattered, but I'm not looking for full-time employment. It doesn't have to be full-time, Bradley said quickly. We could structure it around your schedule. Weekend programs, school visits, summer camps for kids interested in aviation. You'd be developing curriculum and leading demonstrations for young people who might never otherwise meet a real fighter pilot. The offer was intriguing, but Rebecca had concerns. Tom, I appreciate the opportunity, but I need to think about how this would affect my daughter. Actually, I was hoping Emma might want to be involved. We could develop a program where she assists with demonstrations, helps other kids overcome their nervousness around aircraft, that kind of thing. She clearly has your passion for aviation. After hanging up, Rebecca sat in her kitchen, looking out at the suburban neighborhood where she'd spent 8 years hiding in plain sight. The offer represented everything she'd thought she'd given up when she retired from active duty: the chance to share her expertise, to inspire the next generation of aviators, to use her skills in meaningful ways. But it also represented the end of her anonymity. Word would spread through the community that mild-mannered Rebecca Mitchell was actually a decorated combat pilot. There would be questions, attention, and all the complications she'd been avoiding. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas, carrying her favorite stuffed airplane. Mom, are you okay? You look serious. I'm fine, honey. Just thinking about some decisions I need to make. Emma climbed into her mother's lap, a ritual that was becoming more difficult as she grew taller and more independent. Is it about flying? Are you going to fly again? Maybe not flying exactly, but teaching other people about flying. Would you be okay with that? Emma considered the question with the gravity that 8-year-olds brought to matters they deemed important. Would you be happier? The question was so direct, so perceptive, that Rebecca was momentarily speechless. Yes, I think I would be. Then you should do it, Emma said with the confident logic of childhood. And maybe I could help. I know lots about airplanes now. 3 months later, Rebecca stood in front of her first summer aviation camp, watching 20 middle school students prepare for their initial flight simulator experience. Emma sat in the front row, wearing a junior instructor badge and taking her assistant role very seriously. Aviation, Rebecca began, is about more than just flying. It's about precision, preparation, and the courage to push boundaries while respecting the physics that keep us safe. She looked around the room at faces filled with curiosity and excitement. Young people who might never have considered aviation careers, girls who needed to see that women could excel in technical fields, boys who needed to learn that expertise came in many forms. Today we're going to learn about the principles of flight, aircraft systems, and what it takes to be a pilot. But more importantly, we're going to talk about how aviation teaches us to solve problems, work as a team, and never stop learning. As she powered up the simulator for the first demonstration, Rebecca caught Emma's eye and smiled. Her daughter beamed back with pride, no longer confused about her mother's identity but excited to be part of sharing that expertise with others. The call sign Ghost had once referred to her ability to appear and disappear in enemy airspace. Now it described her transition from hidden suburban mom back to visible aviation professional. But this time, instead of hiding in the shadows, she was stepping into the light, teaching, inspiring, and showing young people that extraordinary achievements were possible with dedication and training. The simulator hummed to life, its displays illuminating as Rebecca's hands found familiar controls. But this time, instead of preparing for combat, she was preparing to pass on knowledge to the next generation. And Emma was right there beside her, ready to help other kids discover the magic of flight. Sometimes the most important missions weren't about appearing without warning, they were about refusing to disappear when people needed to see what was possible. The afternoon sun streamed through the museum windows as Rebecca watched her students practice basic flight principles on the simulator. Some struggled with the concepts, while others grasped them intuitively. But all of them were learning that aviation required both technical knowledge and practical application, lessons that would serve them well whether they became pilots or simply better problem solvers. Emma moved among the students with the confidence of someone who'd grown up around aviation expertise, helping younger kids understand concepts and encouraging those who were struggling. Rebecca realized her daughter wasn't just proud of having a fighter pilot for a mother, she was developing her own passion for aviation and teaching others. As the day ended and students gathered their belongings, several approached Rebecca with questions about how to pursue aviation careers. Others wanted to know about her combat experiences, though she kept those discussions age-appropriate and focused on the importance of training and teamwork rather than the specifics of warfare. "Mrs. Mitchell," said Sarah, a 12-year-old who'd shown remarkable aptitude for understanding aircraft systems. "Do you think girls can really become fighter pilots like you did?" Rebecca knelt down to Sarah's eye level, remembering all the time she'd asked herself similar questions during her own career. Sarah, I think people who work hard, study diligently, and refuse to give up can become anything they set their minds to. Being a fighter pilot isn't about being a girl or a boy, it's about being prepared, being smart, and being brave enough to push yourself beyond what seems possible. But it must be really hard. It is hard, Rebecca agreed. That's what makes it worth doing. The easy things don't teach us what we're capable of achieving. As Sarah walked away with her parents, chatting excitedly about aviation careers, Rebecca felt a satisfaction she hadn't experienced since her active duty days. Not the adrenaline rush of aerial combat, but the deeper fulfillment of passing on knowledge and inspiring others to pursue their potential. Emma appeared beside her as they cleaned up the simulator room. Mom, I think I want to be a pilot too. Rebecca smiled, remembering her own 8-year-old dreams of flying. We'll see, honey. You've got plenty of time to figure out what you want to do. But if you do decide to become a pilot, I promise to help you every step of the way. Will you teach me to fly fighters? If that's what you want and you're willing to work for it, then yes. But remember, there are many different kinds of flying: airliners, helicopters, cargo planes, even spacecraft. The important thing is finding what makes you excited to get up in the morning. As they drove home through their familiar suburban neighborhood, Rebecca reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. She was no longer hiding her identity, Emma was proud of her mother's achievements, and Rebecca had found a way to use her expertise in meaningful ways without returning to active military duty. The house that had once felt like a witness protection hideout now felt like home to someone who was comfortable with all aspects of her identity. Combat pilot, devoted mother, aviation educator, she didn't have to choose just one role. That evening, as Rebecca helped Emma with homework, her daughter looked up from her math problems with a serious expression. Mom, can I ask you something about being Ghost? Of course. When you were flying in combat, were you scared that you might not come home to me? The question was more mature than Rebecca had expected from an 8-year-old, but Emma had always been perceptive about the emotional undertones of adult conversations. Emma, when you were born, you became the most important thing in my life. Every mission I flew, every decision I made, was influenced by knowing I had a daughter who needed me to come home safely. Is that why you stopped flying fighters? That's part of it. I wanted to be sure I would always be here for you. But I also realized that there were other ways to serve, other ways to use my training to help people. Emma nodded thoughtfully, processing this information with the seriousness she brought to important topics. I'm glad you came home. But I'm also glad you were brave enough to protect other people. Rebecca felt tears welling up in her eyes. 8 years of worrying that Emma might be somehow damaged by having a combat veteran for a mother, and her daughter understood better than most adults the complexities of military service. Emma, there's something I want you to remember as you grow up. Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is be honest about who you are, even when it would be easier to hide. Like when you told everyone about being Ghost? Exactly like that. As Rebecca tucked Emma into bed that night, her daughter had one final observation. Mom, I think Ghost is a perfect call sign for you. Why's that, sweetheart? Because even when you were hiding, you were still protecting people. And now you're teaching kids like me that we can be anything we want to be. That's like being a good ghost, someone who's always there helping even when people don't know it. Rebecca kissed Emma's forehead and turned off the light, thinking about her daughter's words. Maybe she had been protecting people all along, first through aerial combat, then by creating a stable home environment for Emma, and now by inspiring young people to pursue aviation careers. The call sign Ghost had evolved from describing her combat tactics to representing her approach to service. Always present when needed, always working to make others safer and more capable, whether they knew it or not. As she settled into her own bed that night, Rebecca looked at the photograph on her nightstand, herself and Emma at the Aviation Museum, both wearing flight suits and standing beside the F-16 simulator. Emma was grinning widely, giving a thumbs up to the camera. Rebecca was smiling too, but it was different from her careful suburban mom's smile. This was the confident expression of someone comfortable with all aspects of her identity. Tomorrow would bring new students, new questions, and new opportunities to share her expertise with young people who might never otherwise meet a fighter pilot. Emma would be there beside her, learning not just about aviation but about the importance of being authentic, working hard, and never being afraid to show the world what you're capable of achieving. The pilot they'd once called Ghost was no longer hiding. Instead, she was illuminating the path for others to follow, teaching them that extraordinary achievements were possible with dedication, training, and the courage to be exactly who you were meant to be. And in the end, that might be the most important mission she'd ever flown.